Hello, Mr. Piland's U.S. history students. Today I'll be going over the women's liberation and the women's movement PowerPoint. And so let's get started with that. Here is your weekly agenda for the week of 4/27. Women get the right to vote, and then, of course, they have to earn a little bit more respect in the world as well as in the United States. The PowerPoint is here. It's shared with you. Women's movements of the 1960s and 70s. What we got is another group of people that decided that the 1960s and the 1970s was a good time to try to protest their rights and try to get more equal rights and things like that. Just like a lot of the movements we've heard about, civil rights, Chicano movement. All of that stuff. We've talked about the 1960s being a very big time of activism and people trying to get their fair share of the American pie, if you will. So women's movements of the 60s and 70s, popular word that originated this time is feminism, or are you a feminist? And so that is what we're looking at. All right, feminism is the belief that men and women should be equal politically, economically, and socially. A lot of times feminism or a feminist became kind of a bad word, right? People used that to describe women who they believed hated men or didn't like men and wanted to remove them from power. When in reality, it is literally just a term that means that women deserve as many rights politically, economically, and socially that men do. So that is kind of where that all started from. So why did they feel the need in order to have this women's movement? They had the right to vote nationally. They had gained their rights in that respect. Well, it's because women's roles in society, even though they had gained these rights, were still kind of falling behind men's roles. By 1960, more than 40% of all women had jobs outside the home. This is a good thing. But, of course, it's not as simple as it sounds. When you looked at all the occupations that men were involved in and women were involved in, women were still being kept to certain types of occupations. Things were considered men's work and women's work. Women were doing more of clerical service. They were doing more secretarial work, domestic service, which means housework and things like that. Teaching was still very much considered a woman's job for the most part. Retail workers, people that sold clothes in like department stores, mostly women. And of course, nurses. When you looked at it too, a lot of the work that was considered more women's work was falling behind men as far as pay goes too. So women were definitely getting out there. They had earned a lot of respect, earned a lot of rights, but still were falling behind a little bit and wanted to make sure that men understood that these jobs that they considered men's work, business and construction and all that stuff, those are women's jobs too. And women had every right to those jobs as well. So the president of the United States, or Congress, enacted a presidential commission. What is a commission? In other words, a study. They got a bunch of people together or researchers together, and they paid them money to go out and get information about what is going on in the workplace, what is happening with women in the workplace. Let's get some statistics. So what they found out is that women were paid far less than men, even for doing the exact same job as men. So a woman in the same job as a man was getting less money than a man. The women who were seldom promoted to management positions in a lot of the workplaces that they were in. So women could get into business, great, but they just weren't moving up the ladder as far as men were and as rapidly as men were. And it didn't matter how much they were educated and smart, very highly educated. They were still not able to kind of gain that extra footing, and they were getting less money and less opportunities in the same businesses. So the beginning of this study is kind of where you see the beginning of the social movement, the women that started rallying together and trying to expose what's going on and making their opinions known about what it means to be a woman and why women should have the same rights and are not getting treated the same. One of those people is named we're not there yet. One of those people was named Anna Quinlan. Wait, time out, time out. Um, Anna Quinlan has the introduction on this book. Excuse me, I was right in the first place. A book named Feminine Mystique was created by Betty Friedan was her name. She explained the discontent of many women. In other words, a book about what women are feeling in this day and age and why some are thinking that they're not quite respected and honored the same way that men are, and they should be. It became a bestseller right away. And of course, who do you think bought the book? A lot of it. Women did, of course. And it was a very big deal at the time because in 1963, a lot of times women were expected to, one, be at home and raise kids and be the wife and a mother and so this voice that was coming up, this rising tide of women's discontent, uh, was not something that was a lot of people wanted to hear at the time, especially men in charge of things like businesses. So a lot of women actually started to rally around this book and also demand change, which led to more social movements of the women movement. What else? Okay, so the social movement also created a national organization for women, and it was created to work for women's goals. Women demanded certain types of things, better educational opportunities, not just women's colleges, but college entrance, high level colleges, as well as graduate schools and higher education. Gender discrimination in employment. Women should have the right to apply for and get any job that they want. And then they also asked for, even in the workplace, more childcare facilities so that women could actually go to work and have their children taken care of while they did. In 3 years, the NOW organization went from 300 members to 175,000 members, and that is quite a bit of social power right there. With that many women comes the ability to make some changes as well as have your voice heard. It became illegal at that point to post sex segregated job ads. In other words, you can't just post an ad saying, we need a few good men to come and join or to apply for this position. Women need not apply. You have to open the job up for the ability to hire women. You have to open the job up for everybody. And then you cannot refuse to hire a woman because she's a woman. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that doesn't really change anything. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. Obviously, if somebody didn't hire a woman in these days, they could easily just say something like, well, it's because you have less experience than this guy that we hired. Or it's not because you're a woman, it's because, we were looking for somebody like this. They didn't have to make it about a woman. So sometimes you could just kind of um, skirt the issue, if you will, and find different ways of hiring men instead of women without saying it's because you're a woman. The other One of the other big wigs in the social movement was a lady named Gloria Steinem, who was a muckraker. If you remember back from the Gilded Age or the Progressive era, it was somebody who exposed problems in society. She was a journalist. She began the National Women's Political Caucus, which uh, entertained different political candidates who were women. They pushed for women to become part of the political elite, Congress people, House of Representatives, state representatives, governors, lawyers, things like that. They wanted women to get more politically active. Once there was enough women in politics, they knew that women's issues and women's laws would follow thereafter because they had the ability to make those laws and speak on behalf of women. So that was their goal. This is all part of the social movement and political movement. What were the methods that they used to change people's minds about the roles that women had in society? They protested certain things. The New York radical women protested the Miss America pageant, the idea that you should be able to parade women around and judge their beauty. A woman should not be judged for their beauty. They definitely protested these types of things. They wanted these pageants to show more than just a woman in a bathing suit or or just an evening dress. They wanted them to talk about political issues. They wanted them to be educated women. They wanted, and most of them wanted the practice just to end altogether. We talked about it already. Literature. How do you get people to change their minds about women? Well, you write books, and hopefully those books sell lots of copies, or you write for magazines in places where people look at magazines. Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, and Gloria Steinem wrote for Ms. Magazine, a magazine that was created as part of this movement, a magazine by women, for women's issues. And then last but not least, and one of the more powerful ways that we've learned about in U.S. history, you actually change the laws to accommodate what women are asking for. You get politically active. So legislative issues or legislative changes to Congress that happened. One of the biggest ones was the Title IX amendment. It is, or Title IX law. Title IX was in the 60s or 70s, and it was the law that created equal opportunities for women in sports. There's a lot of research that shows that women who engage in team sports as well as athletic contests have a higher self-esteem, have a better chance of being accepted into certain roles in society, have more confidence. It's all part of the issue. And women were still not given the same amount of opportunities to play sports in school that men were. So now if you actually look at any kind of college web page where they show like the schools, all the sports in that college, there will be an equal amount of sports for women as there are for men. The opportunities have to be equal. That's Title IX. They also passed the Equal Rights Amendment, although it was never ratified by enough states in order to make it legal. The Equal Rights Amendment was an amendment that made it federally illegal for a workplace to not hire a woman because she's a woman. Gave them equal opportunities in the workplace. This is still not officially an amendment. We're working on that one still. And last but not least is Roe versus Wade, the most famous case that gave, at the Supreme Court level, it gave women the right to decide whether or not they could or could not have a child, have an abortion, what to do with their own bodies if they choose. Big issue, women's rights. So let's talk about them just a little bit. Roe versus Wade. Women's right to choose what she wants to do with a pregnancy. Pregnancies could be dangerous. A woman could be financially not able to support a baby. A woman could possibly get raped. And they want to make sure that women had this ability to get an abortion if she so chose. And the Supreme Court ruled that women could choose to have an abortion in the first months of their pregnancy. And that is a federal law. This is still an issue today. People fight over this all the time. And there's a good chance that the Supreme Court could at some point overturn this because it was just very narrowly passed 5-4. And it could turn that over. But we haven't yet. It is still legal federally for women to have an abortion. Title IX, Congress passed a ban on gender discrimination in any education program or activities receiving federal financial assistance. So if a federal government is going to give a public high school money and say, hey, this money is for you to help the school create programs, after-school programs, athletic programs, things like that, we will not give you this money unless the programs that you create are going to be for both men and for women, girls and boys. There's no more all-male schools. Like you can't have an all-male public school, for instance. If you're going to get federal money, which public schools do, you have to make it gender-neutral schools. And sports cannot be only for boys at schools if you're going to receive federal money. If you choose to do that as a public school, you would not be allowed to get any of the money from the federal government. You would not be funded by them, which would be a very bad thing. So that was a very good thing for women. The Equal Rights Amendment. This is a weird one. It's totally had some traction, and it really was on its way to being passed and ratified, but it's unfortunately it hasn't yet. The ERA states that rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or by any state on account of sex. If you remember, something similar happened with equality when it came to being an African American. So they said that you cannot be abridged by the U.S. or any state on account of race. right? So that was a big one. And then women said, well, yeah, we should have the right to say that you can't be abridged by any state on account of sex. And it passed in Congress in 1972. In order for any law to be passed and go into the books, it has to be ratified by the states, and it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And that means 38 states have to ratify it. And so far, and this is talking today, 2020, it has not been ratified by 38 states. I think it's something like 32, 33 states, or it's very, very close. It just hasn't officially been ratified, but it was very much supported as a law. And then, of course, um, anytime that there's something that women fight for, anybody fights for something and wants to pass it, there's always going to be opponents and people that speak out on behalf or against the thing that are trying to be stopped. Phyllis Schlafly was one of the very popular outspoken opponents of ERA. She didn't believe that it needed to be passed. She organized to stop an ERA campaign. She claimed that feminists were radical women who hated men, hated marriage, hated children, and she was very much all for the very typical roles for women: mother, wife, family unit, things like that. A man, a woman, family. And that's why she really spoke out against the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And she was very unpopular with some women for doing so. All right, guys. I think that's all we got for you on this one. It's a very stripped down version. The quiz will be coming real soon, and I hope you guys do really well. Hit up the office hours if you got any questions about the quiz or any grade questions, and we will talk to you very soon. Bye.